Fabre, in particular, deserves the credit for spotting talent, especially for choosing a successor, Fernand Braudel, who disagreed with him over certain important questions, notably the place of free will in human history. So what I'm saying is an open style of leadership produced or encouraged what might be called strong disciples, that is, disciples with minds of their own. So they admire the leaders, but they still do things their own way. And these examples may help us confront the crucial question, what is innovation? Like creativity, which I describe as the propensity to innovate, innovation itself is difficult to define, though we often think we can recognize it when we see it. A historian might add that what is generally recognized as innovation, if one looks quite closely, it will often turn out to be an adaptation of an earlier idea, technique, organization. Maybe a free or creative adaptation, but an adaptation all the same. In the domain of technology, think of the printing press, that is, the Western printing press with the movable type. Because Gutenberg came from the Rhineland, so he was extremely familiar with the wine press, the design of which he adapted in the necessary way for printing books. Turning to ideas, Donald Schoen suggested that new ideas come into being by extending, or as he puts it, displacing old ones. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution borrowed something from a population theorist, Thomas Malthus, something else from a geologist, Charles Lyell, combined, adapted, and produced something that we say is new. So innovation is often, if not always, a kind of bricolage. You might describe it as a kind of collaboration between the dead and the living, with somebody in the present, somebody else in the past. But of course, innovation also emerges from collaboration in the present, especially in face-to-face groups. Hence, the title of a recent book, Group Creativity, Innovation Through Collaboration. And this point about adaptation has, I think, serious consequences for the central problem that I promised to discuss. That is, what conditions encourage the process of innovation? Translating the question into Schoen's terms, what conditions encourage displacement? I think some of them are psychological conditions inside the heads of individuals and groups. Others are social or cultural. Of course, it's important to draw distinctions, and it may well be the case that the process of innovation in different domains, art, religion, business, science, technology, it might take place in different ways. Collective attitudes to innovation also vary with cultures and with historical periods. In certain periods of history, innovation was considered at best unimportant and at worst positively wrong-headed. In art and religion in particular, tradition used to be appreciated while innovation was rejected. So religious innovators, such as Martin Luther, had to disguise their innovation, present their ideas as a return to the past. Renovation, not innovation. Reformation as reformation. In similar fashion, artists and architects revived earlier styles, neoclassical, Gothic revival. It's only in the last 100, 120 years that artistic vanguards and new religions no longer pay that kind of tribute to the past. So I admit a need for distinctions, and if this was a book and not a short lecture, I would say more about this. But what I'd like to do in the relatively limited time is to attempt to think across all these domains. Focus not on domains, but on social units, individuals, small groups, institutions, social milieu, finally, whole cultures. And that's the program I'm going to follow now. First, I'll try to identify certain obstacles to innovation, and then finally, conditions that are favorable to it. When one's trying to solve a problem, it's often helpful to try to turn it upside down. So if we're in search of conditions that favor innovation, why not begin with the opposite, the obstacles? Most obviously, habit. Returning to Schumpeter, he said, habit, it's as firmly rooted in ourselves as a railway embankment in the earth. A certain way of doing things comes to seem natural. Individuals are often unaware of possible alternatives to their own tradition. If subversive ideas occur, they may be repressed, a kind of unconscious self-censorship. It was thanks to his awareness of these obstacles that Schumpeter put forward the famous idea of creative destruction, viewing it as the essence of capitalism and as a kind of permanent revolution from within. Originally formulated to analyze the economy and economic history, this idea is capable of a much wider application. In similar fashion to Schumpeter, the Swedish geographer Torsten Heierstrand has argued that the process of innovation always has a negative side as well as a positive one, a destructive side as well as a creative side. He called the destructive side denovation as opposed to innovation. So maybe the title of this lecture should have been Innovation, Denovation, Renovation. Anyway, that's what it's about. Now, turn now to institutions. There's a paradox in talking about institutions in this context, because the whole point of institutions is to preserve continuity, to make sure that the achievement of individuals or small groups outlives them. And of course, it's obvious enough that many human institutions have firmly discouraged innovation. Some of them, from the Catholic Church to Oxford University, were founded precisely in order to transmit cultural traditions. Same goes for Cambridge. I'm not making a point against a particular university. Deviations from tradition have often been regarded as a kind of heresy. Systems of censorship have often been introduced to detect and suppress them.